All right, I think we're live. Yeah, welcome everyone to the first cluster add-ons meeting. I'm very happy we got this set up. If you haven't joined Slack yet, it's the cluster-add-ons Slack on Kubernetes, and there we have links to the CAP document, to the repo, and to everything else. So I'm quite happy we got this all started. And I see that a bunch of you already joined the meeting notes docs, which is great. So let's all help to keep this up to date for everyone. So far, we have on the agenda, first of all, a quick recap. I think it would be good, Justin, if you could say just a few words on the CAP itself. Then I thought it would be good to do a round of introductions so we know who's interested in this effort, like what you want to get out of it, and maybe also where you would be willing to help or where there's some prior art already. I think that would be great. Justin wanted to talk about the first milestone, what we want to see there. And then I had another point about the meeting time, because there was a bit of a confusion there. So let's hope we can get this figured out. If you have any other agenda items, please add them now. And maybe Justin, you want to start?
Yeah, I will kick us off with a thank you. I'll kick us off with like a quick summary of I guess what we're trying to solve. There is a CAP. This is a subproject of sig-cluster-lifecycle. There is a CAP which describes our sort of goals for the project, which is the PR. I don't know. I'll put the link in the PR later when I have a moment. But essentially, the problem of add-on management has been one that has been an issue for cluster tooling for a long time. I think one of our big challenges has been to define what is an add-on and what is not an add-on, and to scope this to something that is very manageable and doesn't like attempt to solve every application deployment problem. And so we have, I believe, scoped it to be things that are, a cluster add-on is something that is managed alongside the lifecycle or along with the lifecycle of the cluster. So it typically has to be upgraded or downgraded, like when you change Kubernetes versions. And by doing that, we hopefully get a lot of things out of scope and we make it a slightly easier problem to solve. And then the particular approach, or meta approach, I should say, that we are hoping to follow or thinking that we will follow is the idea of using operators, so that there will be a CRD that describes each add-on. I think that's a topic of discussion. And then some code that actually will go and install whatever the add-on actually is based on or controlled by the CRD. This is a community project, so that's our starting point, but we want to figure it out together. I know there's lots of people that have built a lot of things in the past, and some of those motivated this group. Like I think the Bash add-on manager, which is technically the one that KubeUp and currently uses, is one that we would like to get away from. That's our main motivator, but then I think everyone has gotten away from the Bash one in different ways, and I imagine there are lots of learnings in the community or findings in the community that we can benefit from and come together and build something that is simple. The hope is that whatever we create will be, we're not going to mandate that anyone use it, but so I don't think it seems unlikely that it would be part of conformance, for example. But the hope is that it will be good enough that all the tooling will want to use it. And I consider it sort of a success if I want to say the most common open source tooling, and by that I mean KubeUp or Cluster API, or depending wherever that lands, starts to use these operators, COPS, kubeadm, ideally kubespray and the other projects, but none of those projects are going to be required to use it. It's just that will be good evidence of us having created something that is applicable and useful. I don't know if there's, there are more details on a proposed approach in the CAP, And Jeff Johnson, I don't know if Jeff is here. Jeff Johnson and I have done some work on sort of making it really easy. Oh yeah, this is actually important. Making it really easy to create these operators, because the goal is not that this sub-project becomes the maintainer of all operators and the installation of all add-ons or cluster add-ons. The intent is that we create a design pattern and probably some supporting libraries and some supporting tooling so that each add-on is able to maintain their own operator. We don't want to be the central point of operator creation. So for example, Core DNS is the example I like to give. So the hope is that Core DNS will maintain its operator because the Core DNS team knows best how to install Core DNS. And we, in this group, have to make it so that the operator that they create by default will be one that we like and that works well and that follows the same patterns as other operators, so that a user of Kubernetes doesn't have a dramatically different experience when they're using Core DNS or kubedns, or the operator for Core DNS feels consistent with the operator for kube proxy, for example. Just but not doing that by a central team that creates it, but rather establishing good patterns that everyone chooses to adopt.
Okay. Well, yeah. So I think that's quite interesting broadly, but you just mentioned an idea of operator for kube proxy, and that seems like a little bit too much. Why do you need an operator for kube proxy, where kube proxy upgrade is just change of the image tag, right?
Yeah, so it's a great question. We might not need operators for everything. There are a bunch of things that are currently installed by the Bash add-on manager. Kubeproxy is not one of them, interestingly, but I think we would like it to be installed as a daemon set. I don't necessarily. I don't think we should dictate which add-ons are done by operator and which are not. And I think different configurations may choose to have operators for certain things that other configurations do not. So for example, in Cluster API, we've talked a lot about the different configurations and of running clusters, and the idea of like some people are running API server in different ways, and so maybe some of them would end up with a CRD for API server, whereas in other configurations that just makes no sense at all, right? So I don't think we necessarily have to figure out. We certainly should not dictate, in the same way we're not going to dictate whether people adopt operators in their installation tooling. We can leave that as a per tooling decision. We should not like say that some things are not going to be operators and some things are going to be operators. I think it makes a ton of sense to. I think you raise a good point, and so I think for kube proxy specifically, if we're thinking about, if we agree that we want to head in a particular direction and build an operator first to see what comes out, right? Like what is our example operator that we want to see for this to try it out? I agree that probably kube proxy is not the one that we should start with. You're muted, yeah.
Just in your Istio and Knative examples from the KubeCon talk, there's one talk or two talks. I don't know. For some reason I thought you had two talks. Anyway, so the one that you mentioned in the video, that there's Knative and Istio, and those I think are good examples because those are complicated bits of software, and you kind of need to handle dependencies with Kubernetes version, I don't know, potentially a network provider version, or even the cloud provider thing, or whatever. So that makes sense to me, right? So I think those are maybe a bit better examples for the operator use case. I mean, more like for the reason why you'd need an operator, and maybe there's like a sort of a Swiss Army knife type operator that can handle a few standard simple cases, like the case of kube proxy, where the image has to be updated to an image based on based on Kubernetes version. Like if Kubernetes version is this, then the image should be that. or something else, right? Some of those simple things, and maybe like some of the network implementations need an operator of their own. So ViewNet has slightly non-Kubernetes native configuration at present. It's we can pass in basically some environment variables. That means you have to edit the pod spec and add those environment variables in. And that kind of works because most of the use cases where you need to change that configuration are very specific, and users really have to do that. So like, oh, right, okay, we really have to set the MTU or whatever. And that is there for historic reasons, but obviously it could benefit from some kind of a CRD where you could say, okay, ViewNet, I want to use latest version of ViewNet and I want to upgrade it all the time whenever the new version comes out, and I want to use this setting for the MTU, and there are a few other things that you might want to pass in. So that may make sense, right? But then I wouldn't say that every network provider needs an operator, right? But I think it's kind of case by case basis. And yeah, and like I think you mentioned earlier about add-ons being something that sort of relates to cluster lifecycle. I think that is partly the case, but sometimes you do install an add-on after a cluster had been installed, and actually the add-on version doesn't really depend on the cluster version. But the add-ons are kind of essential to the running of the cluster, and the kind of functionality that users expect from that given cluster. So something like ingress for some people, that's an essential add-on that they have to have. And there are those things bring in a few other use cases which I think are important. In the world of EKS control, we kind of like to have add-ons which hook into some AWS things. Let's say we want to provision let's say Vive Cortex. Actually, it's not Vive Cortex, it's just Cortex, right? So if we wanted to deploy Cortex, we need to create some DynamoDB tables. So we'd like to be able to do that as part of the add-on definition. And I don't know how that could be expressed, but perhaps it's an operator. Yeah, I mean, that may make sense. Perhaps there is a Cortex operator that is fairly simple, maybe doesn't do a lot throughout the day. I mean, just initially it kind of just sets up some DynamoDB tables, and then it installs Cortex, right? Maybe that is a reasonable task for an operator. Although I kind of feel like some of those things may. I mean, I wonder whether within this context we could consider the pattern where we have a CRD, but we don't have an operator that is permanently running inside a cluster. It's more like a client-side type operator, which just uses a CRD to track state. And whenever user runs, like, for example, EKS-Cuddle fullbar, like EKS-Cuddle add-on update, it looks at the CRD that of a given add-on, and it looks and what's the latest version and updates it, right? But it's more like client-side with CRD inside the cluster to track the state. I don't know. That was what the kind of way I was thinking, and it may or may not make sense have a daemon.
Ilya, do you think it would help if we made a list of the different requirements people would have for such an operator, and then we decide what's in scope and what isn't? Like you were pointing out a lot of different examples, and I could imagine that everybody in the room has a few.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, people could write down some examples for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I'm happy to add the examples that I know of.
Cool.
Which there'll be too many. So
yeah.
My problem with this is that I'll sit down for days and days and be writing examples. Anyway, but there are a few things there, and maybe we shouldn't limit ourselves to a definition of an operator where it is a piece of software that runs inside a cluster and may have various aspects to it. It's like my biggest worry is that customers will have concerns about having to have more software just to run some software, and some of those things seem to be trivial when you think about them. Why does this thing need an operator, right?
Sure, but
so,
I imagine
kind of need that in mind, I think.
I could imagine that quite a few people here already have like concrete use cases, and if they're simple for us to support, we should do it. Okay, maybe we just do a quick round of introductions where you just let us know who you are and what you would like to get out of this, what your use case would be. Anyone who wants to go first?
Go first, probably. So my name is Alexander, and my colleague here on this meeting, Jose Palafox. We are coming from Intel, and our interest in particular cluster add-ons comes from a perspective is what we have several components which we would like to pre-install in the cluster. So it's related to, let's say, device plugins for different accelerators like FPGA, GPU, and so on. We have several CSI providers which we also want to manage to go with cluster lifecycle, like on all kind of upgrades, installations, mechanism. So we're interested in that project, interested to contribute for operators for our stuff.
I'm willing to go next. My name's Andrew Rudoy. I'm from New Relic. Our interest in this particular project is the description of this KEP is something that we were about to try and do anyway, and they came out at about the same time that we were planning to think about starting to do it. So yeah, that's basically it. We have some add-ons management concerns that we'd like to knock out, and if we can do that as part of a larger community, that would be great.
I can go next, and I think with this many people, we might have to like call the ball to like the next people. So I will nominate someone after I'm done. So be careful. I'm Justin Santa Barbara. I work at Google. We have an immediate need to get rid of the cluster directory in Kubernetes, which I hope is shared by the world. I don't think anyone loves that bash, and we would also love to have a better story in in GKE, but also in OSS. Like for Kubernetes as a whole. I will call out Andy. Do you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Justin. So I can probably speak for several of us at VMware. We are interested in tracking this from the cluster API perspective in terms of add-on management. So while we're working on provisioning clusters in various infrastructure providers, we'd like to have a consistent experience for things like Core DNS and anything else that makes sense as sort of core cluster components. And I guess I should nominate someone next. So Jessica, how about you?
Hey guys, Jessica. I'm with the Red Hat group here, and this is Arvind here with me, and we have some friends in New York as well. So this is, we're from the operator framework group at Red Hat, and we've been working on tools in this space for a while now, so things like lifecycle managing of operators and building toolkits around how developers can create operators and things in that space. And then generally on the OpenShift side, you know, we've been working on operationalizing things at the cluster type level as well. SDNs, the API servers, controller managers, those things. Been writing operators for those. And I'll call on the New York office to kind of introduce themselves real fast.
Sure, yeah. We're also at Red Hat, and we work specifically on the operator lifecycle manager component of the operator framework. A lot of the goals seem to overlap with a lot of the goals of this KEP. So we just wanted to be a part of the conversation, see if we can align on where we're going in the future. I'm Addons, and sorry. So you can't see any additional.
So maybe just next. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for the help.
No problem. So I'm working for Daimler, so Mercedes-Benz. So we are providing an internal Kubernetes as a service platform for our customers. So we have 400 to 500 clusters managing. Currently, a lot of the stuff which could be done with cluster add-ons are done by Terraform, Ansible, and Nomad. So we're deploying coordinates, kubeproxy, Calico, Fluentbit, etc. Currently via Ansible playbooks, and we want to make it more flexible and so we can update it faster. So currently we only have bigger releases every few months, and then we're updating stuff like coordinates, Fluentbit. So this would be nice if you can just do it more on a weekly basis or something like this via operators across the whole fleet. So I think that's it. I'm not sure. Who wants to be next?
Maybe I take next. Christian Schlotter, I'm also from Daimler, a colleague of Stefan. One last word maybe to say. We just wanted to do some kind of a code camp regarding the same topic. So it's a perfect time, this topic, to get up here. Yeah. So.
Hi, I'm Mark Mice from Weaveworks, working on a cluster API implementation and getting to the point where, okay, we got the cluster, now we need to add on actual workloads into the cluster, and having a consistent way to do that for applications and tooling is a useful thing for us. And so working on it with my colleagues here on this. So just wanted to be involved in how we push this forward.
I suppose I could go next, so we can go through all the Weaveworks people. So yeah, I'm Ilya Dmytrychenko. I'm based in London, UK, and it's kind of late time for me. So I hope that we have a conclusive discussion in this meeting about the time of the meeting. So I was going to say that add-ons been a thing on my agenda for quite a while. However, I could see that it's not something that I could kind of solve on my own, really. I spend a lot of time thinking about it. We have a few ideas written up in a PR in Iki Hospital, but then the cap by Justin came up, and that kind of definitely attracted my attention, and that there are a few interesting things there, and I think we should just work on a solution for this problem. I mean, I can talk a lot about use cases, as you could see already earlier on. Anyway, who's next? I guess, Daniel, do you want to introduce yourself? You haven't yet.
Sure. I'm Daniel Holbach. I'm in Berlin, also work for Weaveworks. I'm a community manager, and I was looking for an initiative in Kubernetes to contribute to for a long time, and several of my colleagues pushed me forward and said, look at this cap, this is something that needs doing. So I'm happy to help from a logistics perspective. Yeah, that's me. Do we have everyone? Is there still people missing?
I can introduce myself. I guess I'll go next. I'm Nikhil. I work with Red Hat. I actually work with Red Hat in YC office, remote today. So same concerns echoed.
I'll introduce myself. I'm new to this. I'm Rodolfo Pacheco. I work for AT&T. We developed something called Airship, which is a provisioning mechanism, and we have our own way of deploying the clusters. And now we're interested in integrating the cluster API into what we do, into Airship. Especially interested in involving the bare metal provisioning aspect of this that Red Hat has started with MetalCube, and of course the add-ons, because we do deal with CNI provisioning and CSI and so forth.
I'll go next. I'm Vince. I'm also from VMware, and I work with Andy on Cluster API.
I can go next. This is Siddharth Surana. I also work in VMware. I've been involved with the Cluster API for some time now. I primarily work on the Cluster API vSphere provider implementation side. And again, the topic of add-ons have been an interesting one, which I think we have all discussed for quite some time. So I'm actually pretty happy that we're starting a dedicated group and effort here. Happy to help.
I can go next. I'm Jason DeTibers. I also work at VMware. My main focus is around Cluster API, like Andy said. As we build out Cluster API, I don't want us to have to build our own kind of bespoke add-on management for kind of cluster required add-ons. So anything that we can help out with to have a more broad effort and shared effort around managing those is great to me. And also, in particular, for kubeadm in the past, managing add-ons has been quite painful as well, especially as we handle the shift between kubedns to core DNS, and anything that we can do to have kind of hard-coded static manifests in kubeadm would be great.
I'll go next. I'm Nadir. Also at VMware, working on Cluster API, mainly the AWS implementation. So I'm kind of interested in these sort of where add-ons also require changes to infrastructure and how we could even make that work. Open to anything along those lines.
I can go next. My name is Loke. I work at VMware, and today I've been working on the Cluster API. And today, the way that we bootstrap the nodes and add add-ons is through bash scripts, and I want to get away from that as quickly as possible.
I'll go next. This is Jeff Peeler. I work for Red Hat. I work on the operator lifecycle manager, and my interests are aligned with what has been spoken about before.
Yeah, I'll follow that. Michael Rivnak, also at Red Hat, also based on the same interests. Since bare metal came up a minute ago, I'll plug that. So I worked on the operators decay and did a little work on controller runtime before, but now I work on more of a consumer of those things and a consumer of operator lifecycle manager by working on adding native bare metal provisioning through the bare metal operator and the bare metal machine actuator that we have. So anybody who's interested in that, definitely hit me up to discuss that.
All right, I guess I'll go next. I'm Daniel Lipovetsky. I work with Platform 9 on cluster lifecycle. Working with Cluster API for a little while, and yeah, for us, add-ons have been sort of a pain point, especially when it comes to cluster upgrades. So I guess one thing that I'm hoping to get out of this meeting, working group, et cetera, is just sort of coming up with the common mental models for for upgrading various not like core control plane components, but things like kubeproxy, kubedns, core DNS, things like that. As those things expand, something like maybe Istio or other sort of things that are not quite at the application level, but not at the core either, and upgrading them can have a large impact on applications. And anyway, so yeah, definitely interested to hear more.
The folks, I was just going to say that I'll have to go now, and yeah, I hope we come to some conclusive discussion about the meeting time. This is an incredibly antisocial time in the UK. I have to go.
Yeah. See you.
Bye.
Well, want to introduce myself. My name is Pablo. I work for SUSE. I'm here because we will start working in the architecture of the next release of our CAS platform. We start working on the idea of add-ons, and then realize that as you start adding add-ons to your architecture, then you introduce another problem. And where we're trying to look for some solution already existing, and we found many of them. So one of the ideas that's coming here is try to see if we can arrive to a common denominator of different approaches, because it seems to be a common problem that many people have tried to solve, including ourselves. And the main objective here is to see if there is really we can come to a common approach to this. Not necessarily a common implementation, but at least a common set of rules and how add-ons can be installed in a cluster in a way that can work together if they are developed different providers to the add-on.
Okay.
I can take a turn. My name is Jeff Johnson. I work at Google. I've been working with Justin on these on add-ons for GKE and GKE on-prem. And my sort of not so secret goal with this is to sort of redefine a relationship between cluster bring up and management and the actual add-on installation. So what I really want to do is sort of push out those complexities to the edge sort of and simplify that sort of relationship. So that's what we've been doing so far with GKE and GKE on-prem. So I'm excited to work with the community on it.
If that's everyone, can maybe going over talking about the first milestone. Justin, you had some ideas on this.
Yes, based on our discussion, it might be premature. We come to it at the end, but I like having a North Star we can head towards. I would love to have something like that. I think the example I had in my mind was an operator or whatever we decide for installing core DNS, and that we try to get that into the cube up as an option, the cube up cluster bring up as an option, because although it's deprecated, so it's less of a problem in terms of like breaking everyone, but it's also the one where a lot of EDE tests run, so I feel like we could actually get some mileage on that in terms of testing if we cared about that. But that is a straw man, but it's more just like, do we like the idea of aiming towards something concrete? Because I think one of the big problems in this space is that we risk like just having analysis processes where we just have like, there are a million things that we could build operators for, and hopefully we can get most of those out of scope, but then there are a million different ways to do things. And I feel like if we actually try to build something simple, we will discover plenty of problems that we definitely have to tackle right away. I don't know if anyone, how people feel about going to the idea of moving forwards versus more discussion needed type thing. But that was the point putting that. Sorry.
Building a few things at this phase, I think is just is a really good way to sort of explore and see what concepts work out and what concepts don't work out, you know, and maybe start to help to inform us to maybe figure out where that dividing line should be of ones we actually want or don't want to do, or types of things we do or don't want to do. But I do like the idea of just like picking one or two and building it and seeing what it does.
Are there any strong objections? Like some of you mentioned earlier already what you were hoping to get out of this. Is this what you've been hoping for?
I would emphasize that I like what Jeff said a lot there, where he said that it's like one that we're trying out and that then we can discuss. I think like, you know, like I know Red Hat certainly have a lot of work in the area, and I don't want to be like, we're going to just build something completely different and ignore it all. But I also think that having something that's a concrete verification of what we're talking about is handy. And I'd like to see, you know, if there's one that uses the Red Hat framework, that's great. And if there's one that doesn't use the Red Hat framework, that's great as well. I think we can like look at them, and I want to make it, I want to try to have it be concrete and not like talking abstractly, I find very difficult versus like the concrete option A and option B type things.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest is that since we do have a lot of experience with this already, we have tried a bunch of different things out over the past 2 years. And so we do have some experience about some things that work and some things that don't. And we know that we're not like, we haven't hit operator nirvana already. So we can definitely just like share sort of what we've tried out and where we think we need to go and see if this lines up. I imagine that the solution for add-ons is not going to be like wholesale buy-in to the operator framework. But one thing that we can think about is like dividing up pieces that we know are modular and potentially could help bootstrap some of this if that sounds like a good idea after we've discussed it some more. So is there interest in learning more about what we've tried out already and what, or do you think,
Yeah, and I think there's, I certainly think there is, and I think there should be. I think one of the ways we could do that is we do actually have a repo, so we can like create example, like if we strawman core DNS, but we pick one, we build like a couple of things and see what we think and put them in PRs and discuss them, have some code to look at, and then we can like circle back on them in the meeting and dig back into like the sort of philosophy type questions, I guess, which are harder to do in code.
Yes.
I've picked on core DNS as a straw man just because it seems fairly straightforward. I don't know how people feel if they want to put something else or.
I think one of the things that's interesting to me is the distinction between like different stages of bringing a cluster up and where things fit in. So like there could definitely be a strong distinction between stuff that needs to be available before any real workloads start and things that need to be available after. But even if we decide there's a strong distinction there, it might be valuable to like align on the packaging of those things or something like that. I don't know.
I think that'd be great. I don't think it's required, right? I think we definitely we don't want to try to set this is the system that everything should use at all stages from here on out. But if we achieve that, that's wonderful. But that's not it's not a goal, right?
Yeah, I only bring it up because we don't necessarily want to be in a position where it's not designed to do that, but people start doing it anyway. So it's just something to keep in mind as we talk about this more.
I think that's a fair point.
And Justin, I think you pointed out the scope you guys were interested with add-ons that had to lifecycle with the Kube API server, the Kube version, basically, right? So is that not necessarily things that have to be, as Evan said before, workloads come on, or are there things that still need to lifecycle with the Kube version, but then might be at that next level that other folks are interested in?
Yeah, I think it's things that are managed like alongside the cluster. So it will be, there are things that are required to be, like even if they're not, even if they could be added afterwards, if you're still gonna, if the tooling, I guess, that manages them is part of, if there's a dependency on the Kubernetes version, we would expect that the management of that piece would be done by the tooling that manages your cluster, right? You don't want to have to like deal with two tools when you're upgrading your cluster. So there's like so I don't think dependency is the most important distinction there. I guess there's also a practicality type thing, which is like, should core DNS might not be required, right, to bring up a cluster. I'm not sure whether we currently require it or not. It feels like having DNS is pretty important for I think it's for a conformant Kubernetes cluster. And so we probably put it in more because it's something that all the tooling will manage rather than all the tooling has to manage. But yes, I freely admit that the boundaries are going to be challenging and we should err towards not doing things, but we can't, if we define it so strictly that nothing is in the set of things that we're managing, then it doesn't have a lot of value.
Any more thoughts?
Is there a goal around discoverability of these things? Like right now, it's not super easy to determine what makes up your cluster when you bring it up. For example, which feature gates you have enabled. Like that's a thing you need a lot of privilege to discover. So is one of the goals of sort of managing add-ons in a more defined way to expose some of that to consumers who would need to know, who may not have the privilege to read the feature flags?
I think it's a good addition, and it's sort of a great opportunity to start representing that, some sort of a forum of like health and status and discoverability of what it is. Because when you say an add-on, you know, sometimes it makes up like a daemon set and a deployment, like all sorts of components. So if we have a good path towards grouping that and discovering that all these things relate to, you know, core DNS, or core DNS is healthy and it's at this version type thing, I think that that's a big win.
I think I agree with that. I would call it introspection. I think when I think of discovery, I think of, I know some people have websites where people can go and find add-on operators, and I don't think we're going to mandate that or like compete with that. But I think the introspection use case where you can look at your cluster and find out what versions of things you have installed and whether they're healthy, I think that's super like valuable. And I agree with Jeff. It's a side effect. I think it's a great side effect, and I imagine we will rapidly, we should embrace that, because I imagine it will become very important. Like once we start having it, even if it started as a side effect, I think tooling will come to rely on it and like assume that, yeah, use it.
I think just from my perspective, I think use cases that are kind of on either side of that line between what's required for a cluster to actually work versus, you know, what's not. I personally would have use cases on either side of that line, just because I think there are a couple of things. So for example, container networking or a CNI, something where any pod that we want to run has to be on net host if, you know, before that thing can come up. That's kind of one side of the line. But on the other side, there are a bunch of things that you know, we wouldn't deploy a cluster without. We wouldn't let, you know, the development teams that consume our clusters deploy to clusters that don't have, for example, like our monitoring infrastructure enabled and things like that, that can kind of like, sure, we don't need those to run Kubernetes or for any of the services to function, but we, as far as we are concerned, we consider that, you know, minimally required for a cluster to be available for consumption in our use case. So I just think it's worth noting that I think people are going to have use cases on either side of that.
I agree, and I think for your monitoring thing, I think we have a definition that excludes it, and I think that is the correct thing to do. And I think because it wouldn't necessarily manage, you wouldn't upgrade it if you upgraded your Kubernetes cluster. And I think nothing stops you using an operator to do that. Nothing stops you using whatever operator framework you want to, or not using an operator. And I think that's great. And I think the relevant pieces of tooling should come up with a hook to allow you to do that in a clean way. But I hope if we do that, that would be sufficient to enable you to say, like, for us, a cluster includes these additional components, and we install them using this manifest or this whatever it is, and that I would hope if we have that hooking point, then we don't have to bring it all into scope.
Justin, but we have some gray areas, for example, like the CSI drivers. When there is major changes in CSI spec, you need to update them together with the cluster.
Yeah, I personally would imagine CSI drivers would come into this, like they would be considered cluster add-ons. I don't know how other people feel. At least the core CSI add-ons, which is also weird.
Well, it's not about core CSI, but like the additional vendor at CSI. So, for example, like if vendor is providing like on-prem installation of Kubernetes, we might have specific CSI drivers which we consider be as essential pieces. The same goes with like all kind of device plugins. create a cluster, you most probably changes something on that area.
I guess maybe if we created, I guess what I would hope is if we create a good operator, that those third parties could use the same approach. It doesn't mean that just because an operator is produced or originates from the work of this group, that doesn't mean that it will ship in every Kubernetes cluster or that the Kubernetes project will ship it. So those third parties would be able to use the same framework for these more system level components, even though they aren't part of the Kubernetes release. They might be closed source, whatever it is, and the management experience would be similar. And I guess as long as there is, again, a hook of some sort, there shouldn't be a huge distinction for people whose clusters do include those pieces, and their tooling would include those or hook out to those additional pieces, I guess. But I would hope despite the fact it would be a different party producing the operator, that it would be seamless. And we want that even in the open source. We want to gather operators from the various teams. We don't want to be defining those operators. I don't know if that makes sense, Alexander.
Well, that's true. We don't want to gather everything in one place, but we want to have a scenario where those kind of cluster add-on operators can be developed by different teams. But when for end customer who are getting or creating a Kubernetes cluster, he should be able to discover and use those operators regardless of the source where it comes from. Either it will be vendor it or it will be from Kubernetes community.
And I guess that would be the role of the installation tooling, basically to gather these in a coherent fashion. And we should certainly, I agree with what you said. We should provide guidance, and we can, I'm sure we'll build it in COPS and build it in KubeADM and build it in Cluster API. I don't think we necessarily have to dictate any approach. I guess we can make it. We should make it easy such that everyone does the right thing, which is hopefully sort of like falling into the pit of success, or just falling into success, right?
Yes, make it compatible. Not dictate, make it compatible.
And make it easy to do the right thing, hard to do the wrong thing.
Going off that point, so I haven't read into the KEP too deeply, but it seems like we want to define interdependencies between add-ons and be able to support gating installation of different add-ons based on what they require on the cluster. And I think there's a lot of parallels with like package managers that already exist for like OS level packages.
I will speak. I think this is where building in practice and learning from what Red Hat have learned and our experience in in the work in GKE, I think is valuable. I think it's if you try to design a version dependency framework in general, we could never make any progress at all. And I think it will be interesting to see what dependencies we actually need. Certainly there are dependencies, and one of the goals of having code involved in, operators are code or include code. And one of the goals of having code is that we can actually express some of these or do some of these things that were previously impractical when we just kubectl applied everything in one big blob. I think we've found that we can impose limited sequencing by encoding it through code. And I guess the question is, to what extent is that sufficient, and to what extent do we need more complex declarative definitions of dependencies and some sort of meta solver, which is what most package management systems seem to have. I would hope we get away with it without it, but we will. I would suggest that we try it and see when we fall down. But I've got some people that have fallen down already, type thing, and had to build it.
That's fair. Thank you.
So heard that a couple of you have meetings coming up just after this one. We have 8 minutes left. So I think there were too many strong objections against going with core DNS as Justin suggested. Would there anyone be interested in helping out with this or get together with Justin, talk about this?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd be happy to as well.
Brilliant. I think what would also be helpful, we also have a couple of more questions in the doc here that we write up a bit of a FAQ and put it into the repo, so we can find out what's in scope and what isn't. Where do we want more of this discussion to happen? Is Slack the best place for everyone? Should we use the cluster lifecycle mailing list? Any of the above? I'll take that as a yes.
I definitely like GitHub issues. I find that they are the easiest way to dip in and out. I find Slack very difficult, but Slack is also very handy for quicker things. So
right,
judicious choices when you are raising an issue or raising a topic.
Okay. All right. The last point was the meeting point, the meeting time. Ilya brought that up earlier. So there was some confusion because the US had already changed DST and Europe was just about when the doodle happened, and some people weren't sure that this was PST. So I guess I'll just set up a new doodle and just make sure that it doesn't clash with the with any of the other SIG meetings. Does that work for everyone? Cool.
I've been told that there's also the possibility now that because we're all bi-weekly, that there's now alternate weeks in the same slots, which is obviously going to be even more confusing. But for example, we could alternate with sig-cluster-lifecycle in the off weeks. I don't know how that works for people, but it might be an option to put in the doodle.
Yeah. Okay.
But good luck with that.
Yeah, I'll figure it out. Okay, any last words or any pressing questions? Anything we should still answer in the last 5 minutes? Looks like we're good. All right. Thanks, everyone. I'll make sure to upload the video later on or tomorrow. Have a good one.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.